including this recent arrest of two journalists, I think media freedom in Myanmar is under threat currently, and we all see that media freedom is crucial for the democratization process. How should Myanmar respond to such threats that have been going on in the last 2-3 years, very specifically, especially including the overuse of 66D of Telecommunication Act relating to defamation? How should Myanmar as a nation which is transforming to a democratic society should respond to this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and as a foreigner, you know, I can only say what I hope will happen. Again, it's up to the Myanmar people, but I think there is enough freedom and enough space now for the public to make its views on this known very clearly through a peaceful democratic way, whether it's by statements or on social media or talking to their representatives in parliament, whatever they think is the appropriate, to make it clear that people have voted for democracy, and they want freedom, and that they want the press to be able to do its job. I mean, you have a democratic process. Nowhere in the world is the democratic process perfect, including in the United States. But there's enough structure of democracy here and enough freedom here that I think people have the space, if they want to make their voices heard on this. And I think I'm optimistic that the elected leaders would listen to the people's voices.
Yeah. The previous U.S. administration has shown very commitment to Myanmar and Myanmar's democratic transition, with President Obama visiting the country twice, if I remember correctly, twice.
Right.
How about the current U.S. administration led by President Trump? Is there any things exhibited in terms of active interest in Myanmar?
Well, I was just in Washington a few weeks ago, and I can tell you there's tremendous interest in the administration, in our Congress, in the press, civil society groups, and of course Secretary Tillerson was just here a month ago and saw the state councilor and the commander-in-chief and spoke very openly and directly about our strong support, continuing strong support for Myanmar and its democratic transition. We're maintaining our high levels of assistance, all of our programs, and so I can tell you that the commitment to support democracy here remains very strong.
Yeah. If we look at the other issue in terms of economic development in Myanmar, it seems that economic growth in the last 2 years has been slowing a little.
Right.
What do you think of the interest of the American companies which are interested in coming to Myanmar? Are they, with this all the news that are also negative in the international press, that make their interest going down? Are they interested to come in, or what kind of interest do they have? Because whatever it is, Myanmar need foreign investment, that is for sure. So, and economic growth is going down, slowing down a bit. So what kind of interest now the American companies have in Myanmar, for Myanmar?
Well, I think with Myanmar's opening, starting several years ago and continuing through the elections and the new government coming in, there was a lot of interest from U.S. companies because they hadn't had the opportunity before. We've seen a number of U.S. companies come in here and invest, and many more looking for opportunities. So that continues. I think there's two factors that I would highlight. One is, like a lot of Myanmar business people, they're looking for more clarity in policy. What's the policy going forward? What's the government's vision and policy? So they're looking at that side, certainly, for one. And second, per your question, clearly this crisis is having a negative impact in a couple ways. One is, I mean, on tourism in these areas, as you can see, a lot of people are hesitant to come until the situation improves. Second, I think for companies, it's raised a lot of questions. They worry about their reputation of doing business in a country that now is getting a lot of negative press. So I think, at least in the short term, it has a negative impact. But we just had a U.S. business delegation here about 10 days ago. So I think the crisis has hurt, but going forward, there's an opportunity to rekindle that interest, not only from the U.S., but I think from other countries as well, by addressing the crisis very openly, and also by continuing to make progress on the economic front. So my hope is over the first half of next year, we can see steps that address the Rakhine crisis very, very frontally, and also progress on the economic reforms. And I think if those two things happen, you'll see that investor interest pick back up.
In terms of business environment, recently the Myanmar has adopted or has got this new company law, which many people say very proactive and very good for the business coming in. So what are the things that you think Myanmar still need to focus on in terms of getting the foreign business coming in, especially from the United States, the business from the United? What are the challenges that Myanmar need to look at?
Yeah, well, I'll mention some challenges, but as I do that, I want to stress every country, including the United States, has economic challenges. So it's not that Myanmar is the only one that has to. Certainly implementing this Companies Act, it's going to take a little bit of time, I understand, fully implementing that. I think continuing to strengthen the financial sector, continuing the reforms to improve and strengthen the banking sector. Critically, I think the government laying out a clear vision and clear policies. And this is something that I hear not only from American companies, but from Myanmar companies. More communications from the government. Here's what we're planning to do. Here's our policy. A very clear, as much detail as possible is extremely helpful. And then continued efforts to build the infrastructure and all of these things, electricity. Concerns about whether there'll be sufficient electric power is one big issue. And then continued efforts to build up the capacity of workers, skilled workers. Again, this is something that's not unique to U.S. companies, but for all. Some of these things can be done relatively quickly, others take more time. But I think as long as companies see progress and movement, good communications, plus, as I said, addressing the Rakhine crisis very openly and frontally, I think a combination of those things will have a big impact.
You have seen this Nationally for Democracy led government from the opposition to power in the last 2 years now. NLD government has been in power for a little over 2 years. And of course, the main challenges that we have talked about. How do you see, what is your personal opinion on the performance of a democratic government, which is very new, which has been in power a little bit more than 2 years? How do you see the overall performance in a democratic setup?
Well, I think it's important to say, and as you know, that this government came in and inherited enormous challenges and didn't have a lot of experience in government. That's not their fault, but it's just a reality. So I think we knew this was going to be a challenge and it would take time, and I think they've accomplished some very positive things. But you know, I've been all over the world. I've never been anywhere where people are fully satisfied with how a government is doing. A government never can do enough. So I think there's certainly areas for improvement, so a lot of specific areas. But I think probably what I hear the most, including from my Myanmar friends, is a hope that the government will do more communicating, will do more laying out its policies and its visions more to the public. I think that's something that could be strengthened, in all honesty, in the current government, and I think that would go a long way. There's a lot of specific things as well, governance challenges and so on, and being able to strengthen the governance so that decisions made in Naypyidaw are actually carried out at the state level, which is hard in any country. But I would focus, I guess, mostly on communication, clear, here's what we're doing, here's why, and here's how it's going to affect people.
If you look at the last 2 years, in your opinion, what is the best the program or policy the current government could have achieved, so far?
Well, I think there's been a lot of progress on passing new laws or changing some old, outmoded laws. I think progress on things like releasing political prisoners. There's been a lot of work on infrastructure. I see when I travel around the country, I see road work and electricity and these sorts of things happening throughout the country. I think making clear a strong commitment to fight corruption. It's hard to get rid of corruption, but I think we've seen out of this government a very strong commitment from the top to fight corruption and strengthen rule of law. And I think there's been actually a lot of good work in economic reforms, including on the financial sector side. So I think there's been a lot of good work. It's natural around the world to focus on what hasn't been done, but I think it's important also to recognize good work and continued movement on peace, even if it hasn't been as fast as people would like. I think continuing that peace process has been critical.
I'm asking this question because I think Washington championed Aung San Suu Kyi in the years leading up to 2015 elections. Now she has been facing tremendous international criticism from international community at large, especially on Rakhine issue. Personally, or the position of the United States, what do you think? How best she could handle such situation?
Well, I have a lot of respect for her personally. She's sacrificed and done so much for the country, and I continue to have a great deal of respect for her. But I think it's a mistake to put it all on one person, even someone as important as she is. Because whether it's the United States or Myanmar, you don't build a democracy just with one person, right? This is something that requires an effort not only by everybody in government, but by society as a whole. And so we continue to be strong supporters of the government, the state councilors-led government. But even more important, we're strong supporters of everybody who's working to build a stronger and more peaceful and prosperous and democratic Myanmar. And so, again, not to take anything away from the state councilor's role, which is hugely important, but I think it's essential to emphasize that this is a societal effort. And it's at the media, civil society, people at the union level of government, but also at the state and local level of government. And so we want to work with all those people to try to help make progress. And clearly, the state councilor plays an essential role. And she's gotten a lot of criticism. I don't want to speak for her, but I think she knew when she went into this position that political leaders tend to get a lot of criticism, and they do in the United States, in Europe, and everywhere. That is unfortunately part of the business of being in government and politics.
Lastly, now we are ending 2017 and looking forward to 2018 New Year, and also looking forward to the next 3 years of the current government term. How do you foresee, if you can, Myanmar in next 2-3 years in terms of democratization and transforming from a dictatorial setup or regime to a democracy? How do you foresee Myanmar for next 2-3 years?
I don't want to make too many predictions because usually when I make predictions I'm wrong. But what I would say, I'd go back to something Secretary of State Tillerson said a few months ago. And it was about Rakhine, but it's really about all of Myanmar. that this crisis is a crossroads for Myanmar. And I think it's a terrible tragedy, a human tragedy, what's happened to a lot of people during this crisis. But going forward, how Myanmar grapples with this, not just the government and the military, but also the public as a whole, the media, everybody, is going to tell us a lot and tell you a lot about the future of the country. My hope as a friend and someone who cares deeply about this country is that the people will, and the media and the government will take a hard look at what's happened, acknowledge some fairly substantial failings. And again, we've had failings too. I'm not trying to be too harsh. And address those very honestly. Because there's been, what we've seen over the last few months is a very strong nationalist push and pressure, which I understand. There's a feeling of being under pressure from the international community, and people respond to that. It's human nature, and I fully understand it. But I hope for the sake of Myanmar's democracy that people will be able to step back and look and say, let's have an honest discussion about what's happened and about what kind of society we want to be going forward, and let's hear different views, and then based on that make our decisions about how we want to move forward as a nation. And I think if Myanmar is able to do that, I'm wildly optimistic about this place.
Is there any particular message that you would like to give to the people of Myanmar?
Just that it's a difficult time for a lot of people right now. We understand that. It's easy as an outsider to say that these difficult times happen and you have to work through them. But my government, the American people, and I think a lot in the international community, we really want you to succeed. We're really hoping for the best. And that's very sincere. And we remain partners. Not only with assistance through money, but as friends who really want to work with you and support you as you work through a very challenging time, and wish you nothing but the best for the future.
Thank you, Excellency, for this.